So Heather, as I mentioned at the outset, your predictions were pretty good last time. I am sort of reflective of the time. You know, where does the board responsibility start and stop versus getting into management? And you've mentioned a number of things. First in terms of the evolvers, and I guess my sort of question to the panel here is around the evolvers, the talent and leadership and diversity. Do you believe that is that ingrained with HR committees? That's being covered off pretty well, or is there still more work to be done on that front? I'm going to come back to the next wave, but first, how are we doing against that? The evolvers, is it getting the right attention at boards and HR committees?
So my experience would be there's very few committees, HR committees, that are not thinking about this and spending more and more time on this, particularly due to where they have risk in the business, particular parts of the business, or where they've had succession failure, which does happen, where you have a critical part of the business and you believe you have succession, and when you actually go to execute succession, you don't have what you thought you had. So I believe it has shifted. Is there more to be done? There absolutely is, because it's getting more and more competitive out there and the workforce is aging.
Maybe Paul, your kind of reflections on this.
Well, first of all, I would agree with Heather's response that diversity issues are very much front and center in the Human Resource Committee's agenda, and I've seen these things discussed on an ongoing basis. I think that just dealing with the gender side of this for a moment, we've made good headway over the course of the last decades in addressing the issue of advancing women in organizations. And I think that there is some acceleration of that, and I think that's all very encouraging. I think we are still not where we need to be. There is still a preponderance of leadership provided by males of standard cultural groups, and therefore we have to keep pressing on the issue of advancing gender and other diversity issues, and particularly in the inclusion framework that Heather has described. What I would describe as a not yet emerging issue, but one that I think we need to pay attention to, is what is the potential effect of the advancement activities that we're engaged in on boys and men in our community. And in that sense, I'm saying to myself, what's the effect on boys in school of the I Am a Girl campaign? What is the implication of the undergraduate population at a university, for example, like Guelph, being at this stage 30% male and 70% female? What are the implications in terms of our operations in companies in circumstances where men of this generation may need to be responsible for all of the things that women have not achieved over all of the previous generations? And I'm not convinced that that's an issue yet, but I think it has the potential to be an issue, and I think we need to watch for circumstances where men in organizations feel less engaged as a result of these activities.
Maybe Heather or Sue, some thoughts around that. I'm not sure if that's it actually hit the radar screen, Paul. You probably have come up with a very emerging consequence around this. But maybe, Sue, just a bit on TD, some of the work you've done. I know you've done a lot on diversity and the subject of inclusion.
Yes, I mean, I think it is a very pertinent topic right now, and I do agree with Heather and indeed Paul that we're at a pivotal inflection point in terms of moving from diversity to inclusion. Maybe just to make meaning of that a little bit, I think where we've been, at least within TD, you know, we've been on, if you will, the diversity journey for a number of years now, where we looked at really different segments of our population: women, people of minorities and colour, people with disabilities, Aboriginal peoples and so forth, and tended to look at them as groups, diverse groups, and apply programs, policies, practices that would help people from those various groups have equal opportunities to advance within the organization. I think as we mature our thinking, I think the good news from my perspective is in TD there's great understanding that this is a business issue. We don't have to preach that any longer. To draw from the widest talent pool just makes good business sense. But the piece about moving from diversity to inclusion now is maybe gets to a little bit of what Paul's saying. Whilst we're not where we want to be yet, at least in TD, in terms of seeing a fair representation across all those groups, we are turning our attention more to think less and less about people from disparate groups and more how do we create that truly inclusive environment where whether we're male, female, white, black, of color or not, we're thinking about people on an individual level and what it takes to really make them feel that they are able to come to work and bring their whole self to work and not feel that they've got some unfair disadvantage working against them. So I do think it's a fair point, and when you quote a stat like the one that you just have relative to the Guelph population, clearly that's here and now, and so we need to pay attention.
And Heather, any other thoughts on that?
Well, I completely agree with you, Sue, but I would just add that I think the shift from diversity to inclusion and the idea that you want diversity of thought, that you want to give, everybody, the equal opportunity and the fair chance to have the opportunities for advancement and fulfilling their career objectives. But probably the most important thing is that diversity of thought as you are responding to this competitive business environment. It just makes you a better organization and a better business, and you putting everybody on equal footing and breaking down the silos as you talk about, so that you're really getting that richness, and everybody is bringing the best and their whole self to work is really, really important. And just simply, Paul, to your point, I think there's a lot of research being done around the education system and how we're preparing boys and for the future. And so I think we'll see more written on that going forward around how do we prepare them for the future.
Can I just ask another one, Dawn, that is sort of on this subject, and that is one real potential source of human resource that I think we're not paying enough attention to, and hopefully, Sue and Heather, you can tell me I'm wrong, is women returning to the workforce after childbearing years, and the extent to which we've developed programs for them that assist them in being able to accelerate their development and get back into the workforce in effective ways. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. This was an area that we started to focus on about probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And actually what we've developed, one of a number of approaches, is actually in partnership with Rotman. We've designed what we call a back to work program, where we attract a cadre, a cohort of women who may have been out of the workforce for a variety of reasons, often to do with child rearing and families, but sometimes they've come as immigrants to this country and haven't been in the workplace in Canada for yet, or for a period. And what we do through a series of mentoring, through some classroom, through actually bringing them into various workplaces and having them work with members of their cohort within organizations, we again really reacquaint them and open them up to the current world of work today. It also, quite honestly, gives many of our leaders, at least in TD, a chance to meet, interview, assess these women. And the great news is the program becomes more and more successful each year, and we've actually hired now a number of women directly out of the program, although that's not really how it started as a direct recruitment tool. But as we've evolved it and word has spread and we have the opportunity to select a great cohort, we've actually had some great success with that program.
So while we're on the subject of diversity, and Ken, we have you as a compensation, you know, the question comes up, what about parity of pay practices in this area?
Well, you know, equal pay for equal work, as I'm sure many of your viewers will know, has been an issue. There's been a lot of legislation and activity. In our view, it is a work in progress, and I think it divides the workforce between what I would call the new economy workers, who are highly skilled, highly flexible, and very mobile, and whose ability to extract full price for their services is pretty high. And put bluntly, if you're a female not being paid as well as you should at one employer, you'll find another. And that mechanism allows that group to basically make sure that there's, through a market mechanism, basically comparable pay. As an employer, I would certainly put ourselves in that bucket. Having said that, that's the good news. The less good news is what I would call old economy jobs, people who are less skilled and where there are many job classifications which are female dominant. No doubt the legislation has helped, but in the end it is, I suspect, lagged, and there is still a disparity. To my mind, the market will ultimately speak, and I watch with interest as some of these big retailers in the US have been essentially obliged, because of the market, to increase their pay rates to their most modestly paid people, who quite obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, who are visibly mostly females. So work in progress. The good news is if you're in the modern economy, highly educated and mobile, frankly, as an employer, you just can't afford not to pay the going rate. And there's one rate, and you know the output is basically indistinguishable as to whether it comes from a male or a female. But in these categories of employment where they are still female dominated and where the individual has relatively little leverage, I suspect there's still a gap.
As you can imagine, the topic of diversity, and of course an important concept of inclusion, is a very broad one. My guess is HR committees and certainly management, human resource professionals dealing with that, and will be for quite some time to get it dealt with. I thought, Heather, your point around what we're really trying to achieve is diversity of thought is the critical piece. By bringing different backgrounds, experiences onto the executive management group and the board, you get a different thought process happening. Ken, I sparked something there.
You did, and actually it was this notion that women of childbearing age will sort of leave the workforce and maybe come back. I may be dreaming in Technicolor, but some of our most capable people are women, many of them just coming into that era. My maybe wishful thinking dream is that we can find some sort of ongoing situation where they would actually not drop out of the workforce. We have such a huge investment in terms of their skills, their relationships with clients. So the idea, it is almost certainly less expensive for us to have things like on-site daycare than it is to replace those people. So obviously there's a counterparty here. I don't know what they'll say or do, but the notion that they'll just sort of be out of the workforce for 5 or 10 years is frankly frightening. So if I can do anything to change the definition of workforce and being in and out and working part of the time from home, that's what I will do.